right, how we doing? I'm Coach John with Freedom Nutrition Coaching, and welcome. Great to have you here. Today, we're going to talk about how our amazing brain builds habits. We're going to talk about how you can tap into the power of neuroplasticity to create an unstoppable change that sticks. So, if you ever doubt your ability to change, or feel stuck in your old ways, or wonder if it's too late, what I'm about to share with you may surprise you or even amaze you, because knowing how to tap into this significantly increases the positive change that you can accomplish. At any age, if you want to learn a new skill, you can. And so my hope is that by the end of this video, you're going to feel empowered knowing that you can create positive change and it doesn't require superhuman effort to do so. So often we think about our brain like a computer, but I want you to imagine a computer that can grow new circuits. That's our brain. That's our amazing brain. So let me see if I can paint a picture for you to illustrate what neuroplasticity kind of looks like. Imagine settlers arriving at this new, undiscovered land, and the first time they crossed this land, it would be slow because they didn't know the best way. They would encounter mountains and valleys and forests and rivers and so on. And they'd have to stop and have to look around and survey and think about what's the best way to go. But as they went back and forth, they would start to learn where the shortcuts are, the fastest routes, and so on. And the more times they crossed back and forth, the smoother and easier the trip would become. And then once they'd figured out the best way to go back and forth, they could even eventually pave the road and make highways and things like that. And then once the highways are paved and now the roads are permanent, they can zip back and forth easily. That's kind of like an analogy of what happens in our brain. So in one study, for example, researchers studied two groups of students. One group, they taught about neuroplasticity. They taught about how the brain learns. The other group, they didn't teach about neuroplasticity and how the brain learns. And they followed this group for 2 years. Now, the result? Well, they discovered that the students who understood how the brain learns and how the brain works and forms habits and what neuroplasticity is, they got significantly better results than those who didn't learn about this. So the real question then is, why is that? Why is this information, why is knowing this so powerful? Well, the students who knew that their brain had the ability to change and reorganize itself, they didn't give up when they made mistakes. They kept trying because they knew the brain could learn and grow. So let me paint another picture for you. It's kind of like if you had to cross a field and it's covered with tall, overgrown grass. And the first time you cross, you're going slow. There's lots of resistance and uncertainty because you can't really see ahead. You don't know what's hidden in the grass. But each time you cross, the grass gets a little bit more flat, a little more pressed down, a little bit wider. But now imagine you were crossing this field and then you fell into a hole. Would you stay in the hole? No. You would get up, pull yourself out, and you'd make a note and you'd walk around the hole next time. And that's why it can actually be really helpful when things don't go according to plan, because it helps us to learn. It helps us to learn new things. For example, you would walk around a new path around that hole the next time. And that's kind of like this ability to iterate, to make adjustments, to tweak. When you find something that's not working for you, if you adopt kind of this flexible mindset, you make an adjustment, you change what you're doing slightly, and then you keep going rather than just throwing away your efforts altogether. And so our brain is made up of literally billions of cells called neurons. And actually, there's as many neurons in your brain as there are stars in the Milky Way. That's pretty amazing to think about. Now, your brain also produces enough electricity to power a light bulb. Maybe that's why we see in the cartoons they have that light bulb over their head when they're thinking. But it's this electricity that actually creates connections between neurons. And there's some really, really interesting things about neuroplasticity. Number one, if you're not in the mood for learning, your brain actually switches off neuroplasticity. So if you're distracted or disengaged or mindlessly going through the motions, the changes that you might make are just temporary. And actually, that's another thing, is initial changes are just temporary. So just like walking through that grassy field, the first few times the grass would kind of bounce back up after you've walked through it. So in other words, a behavior has to be repeated in order for change to stick. Now here's something really cool. You can create change by imagining things as well. So we can use mental rehearsal to create change in the brain. So let me give you another study example. Two groups of people. Group 1 actually practices finger strengthening exercises. Group 2 only imagined they were doing finger strengthening exercises. So Group 1 saw their finger strength increase by 30%. Pretty good results. Group 2, who only visualized doing it, they never actually did the physical activity, they saw their strength increase 22%. That's amazing. That's almost 80% of the result just by thinking about it versus actually doing the action. Now, it's really important to think about, though, or to realize this can be a two-way street. So if we tell ourselves something unhelpful repeatedly, that can actually move neuroplasticity in the wrong way. So neuroplasticity is also a use it or lose it process. So if we don't continue to practice habits or skills enough times before the habit is formed, the habit won't stick. And this is where having some kind of accountability really makes a difference. Because when you have little reminders and little prompts to help you in the beginning, some kind of cue or reminder, it's more likely to stick. Because when we're trying to create change, in the beginning, it does require a conscious awareness, conscious thought, conscious reminders. And so when people work with me, for example, my program Lifestyle 180, within my app, I give little reminders each day. This is what you're working on. Remember to do this. That's helping the brain to pattern the behavior. Now, what's really cool is also I encourage anybody that I work with not just to take whatever practice I put forward at face value, but to be open to making adjustments or tweaks. So again, adopting a flexible mindset where if something doesn't quite work for you, not saying I'm going to throw this away altogether, but how do I adjust this to make this work for me? So there's something else that's really cool about neuroplasticity. There's a term called transference. Now, what this is, essentially it's like transferable skills, but inside your brain. So as you develop one skill or habit, you learn something and you learn some transferable skills that can be used in other habits as well. So that means that like new habits become easier to learn and develop. So there's this cumulative effect because of transference. So one more thing about neuroplasticity before I get into the 4 specific practices for how to deliberately tap into neuroplasticity. So something really, really important to understand about neuroplasticity, and that is that meaning matters. In other words, it's really important to have a very good reason why we want to do something, why we want to develop a skill, why we want to create change. So the reason this matters is because when we can connect a sense of meaning and purpose to the habits and skills, because very often we're talking about small behaviors that, done once don't really create a huge effect, but these small behaviors, when repeated over time, create a very significant effect. Now, when we can attach an emotion, I call it the emotionally compelling reason, a sense of purpose and meaning behind the small actions, now you're no longer just doing the action because somebody told you you had to, for example. And that means that these behaviors are more likely to stick because our brain sees them as important because there's an emotional connection to it as well. So, how can we practice and develop neuroplasticity? How can we harness it? How can we tap into this? Because when we hear a term like this, it's really fascinating to think about how our brain works, but it can also be a little bit overwhelming. I have really good news though. Your brain already knows what to do. You influence your brain with your inputs. And so I'm going to share with you 4 ways that you can facilitate neuroplasticity in your brain. Ready? So number 1, visualization. So you remember earlier that I touched on mental rehearsal. That is creating pictures, not just creating pictures in your mind, but you start with a picture in your mind of what you'd like to accomplish. And then you actually visualize yourself going through those motions. I think as a kid, probably when I played like basketball or street hockey or something like that, I envisioned, scoring the goal or hitting the game-winning shot or things like that. Well, that visualization is a really helpful process for developing skills. So, and visualization itself is a skill. So practicing mental rehearsal. Number 2 is inner dialogue. So becoming aware of how we speak to ourselves in our mind. And our inner dialogue it has some similarity to this mental rehearsal. It has the ability to influence brain growth. So becoming aware of how we speak to and about ourselves within our brain really matters because once we're consciously aware of it, now we can influence it. And remember, neuroplasticity is a two-way street. So we want to influence it in a positive direction. So number 3 is journaling. So this is an opportunity to put your thoughts on paper. And doing this is a really great way to clear your mind of stresses and worries, because stress actually, again, can really inhibit neuroplasticity. It makes the brain go back into not into learning mode, but into survival mode. So we need to be out of survival mode in order to learn and grow. So something like journaling, doing brain dumps, things like that can help us take whatever feels like it's cluttering our mind, put it on paper so we don't have to think about it, and then neuroplasticity itself can flourish. And number 4 is gratitude. So gratitude rewires your brain to be more emotionally healthy, more mentally healthy, and that even spills over into physical health. By practicing gratitude, you're making your brain healthier and stronger. Here's why. So with gratitude, what we're doing is we're looking for something positive. Now, our brain, our primal brain in particular, is hardwired to look for negative things. And so whenever we encounter something negative, it triggers a defensive response. So that's our default. Gratitude is us consciously deciding to look for positive things. And the more we do it, and it doesn't matter big or small, the more we do this, the more we practice gratitude, the stronger this becomes and the more healthy our brain becomes. It really helps to shape our brain in powerful, positive ways. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope this was helpful, and I'd love to hear from you what you found the most helpful, especially the 4 ways to tap into neuroplasticity. I really genuinely hope that you're inspired as you can see and maybe understand and know how your amazing brain, with this skill of neuroplasticity, it means that you can create positive change at any stage in your life.